Prologue. The Vixen. Tessa's never been one to let others boss her around. She cares not for the herald's schemes, nor for her mother's plans or Wu Chen's nagging. She's only ever cared for one thing, doing whatever piques her interest at the present moment. Only by letting nature take its course can we speak with the heavens in the Vixen way. End of Prologue. Chapter 1. Of Witches and Prophets. Listen and heed, a great calamity comes. It stalks and it waits as a thief in the night. It is patient and vicious as a deadly hunting beast. It clothes itself in our colors, the better to claim fellowship. Our enemies will cry out in claim of Sunwing, but hold Moonbane in their hearts. They will render service while doing secret works. They will speak honeyed words of turning that will sour in the belly. They will blaspheme the name of our God, even as they seem to exalt. And so I say again, listen and heed. Our enemy is clever, but you what? The reverent silence of the chamber was broken, and Tessa let her gaze fall on the whelp who'd interrupted her. 10 ember witches stood gathered around the central fire. 6 shifted uncomfortably, wide-eyed and worried. 3 were flushed with second-hand embarrassment. But only 1 was angry, haughty, and bristling, and unafraid to meet her stare. The youngest of the leaders of the Vesper Coven was a Spitfire who'd been causing problems for Tessa since she'd arrived. She liked her, actually. The little witch was whip-smart, and of all her peers, she was the only one who remained unconvinced and suspicious. It was a fun challenge to weave her lies with ever more complexity, each layer dangling farther and farther out of the young woman's reach. Tessa appreciated the part she played, however unwittingly. The whole game would have been far too boring otherwise. Still, that did not stop the satisfaction she felt when one of the elder witches reproved Salma. What? Salma was still watching her, the firelight making glowing embers dance in her brown eyes. Listen to her. But 2 days ago this woman was a stranger. None of us have ever heard her name or seen her face, yet here she comes, claiming to speak for Sunwing and spouting nonsense. Our God, she says, but how is it that someone meant to guide our people isn't even from the valley? Why would Sunwing send us a stranger who won't even tell us where she's from? Need a believer be from Vesper Coven, retorted another elder, his arms crossed, and a deep frown etched into the lines of his face. The phoenixes worshipped the world over. Is it truly so strange? We are the embers. Salma nearly snarled the words, her glare across the fire carrying with it the heat of a forge. Tessa felt the fox in her begin to growl in response to the perceived challenge, but she hushed it with a bemused promise. Soon, our blood has been devout for generations, ruled Vespern Coven for generations. I refuse to believe that any savior would not be chosen from our own. None of our records, none of our stories, none of our myths or tales make mention of a coming prophet. Brothers and sisters, where is your sense? The 10 began to argue. It was not the first time Salma had raised her concerns, and it was doubtful it would be the last. Tessa allowed herself a slow smile as she stepped away from the fire to enjoy the chaos. But 2 days, and the peace of the valley had been broken. She had to admit, for a chore she'd been so irritated at the thought of, this trip was becoming a small delight. Humans really did make for the best toys. Pray, the spirit in her corrected, and she thought back, yes, that too. The witches bickered as children, talking over each other and pointing accusing fingers across the central flames. But the hush that fell over them at the mere sound of Tessa's voice was instant. She purred, and 10 pairs of eyes swiveled in her direction. She circled slowly about the fire toward Salma, reveling in their enthrallment at her presence. 6 faces flushed with color as she passed behind them, laying a comforting hand on their shoulders. 3 faces craned toward her with desperate longing, whose shoulders she did not touch. But Salma drew back in revulsion as she neared, and Tessa's eyes sparkled as she offered a hand to the woman. "Little Spock, what are you afraid of?" The response she got was a scoff, the witch bristling and leaving her proffered hand untaken. "I'm not afraid of anything," she spat, turning her attention to the other 9 embers. "I'm trying to protect us, protect our legacy." Tessa pressed her hand to her chest and frowned in a masterful display of hurt, stepping closer, her stare never leaving Salma. "You wound me. If you aren't afraid, what's the harm in allowing me access to the relic? Sunwing himself sent me to safeguard it. Sunwing himself bade me prepare for a threat to the good people of Vesper. How many times must I repeat the truth before you believe me? I want to help you all." She looked between the other faces of the embers, entreating them each with wide, soulful eyes. Even now, he whispers urgency to me, all my warnings from him. In the 2 days I've been here, I could already have achieved my purpose. The fire you have for your home is admirable, little Spark, and our Phoenix is lucky to have such fervent guardians of his faith. But what purpose does this resistance really serve? A low murmur arose about the central flames as the witches conferred with one another. Tessa didn't care. Her attention had returned to Salma, whose eyes had narrowed as she fell into uncharacteristic silence. She knew that brooding glare well. It was the rage of someone running out of options. "Prove it." When the whisper finally came, it was low and firm, spoken to her and her alone. Tessa arched a perfect brow at Salma, whose stare bored into her as if it might somehow dig out the truth. The witch took a step toward her, raising her voice so all assembled could hear. "If what you say is true, prove it. Show us that you speak for Sunwing. Give us a sign. You say you hear him even now. Show us." The challenge on the witch's face and the glimmer of triumph was almost enough for Tessa to break character. She wanted to laugh at the poor girl, could feel the sound bubbling in her throat, but instead she let her eyes soften. The central fire crackled and popped. The 10 embers watched and waited for her response, shifting in nervous anticipation. Tessa closed the distance between them with slow, deliberate steps, regarding the young woman with a mixture of sadness and pity. She again reached out, and this time, when Salma didn't draw back, she laid her hand on her shoulder and squeezed. There was only one thing to say. "I'm afraid that's not how faith works, little Spark." Salma's face flushed with embarrassed rage, the hue unmistakable even in the firelight. She opened her mouth, then closed it, and with nothing left to say, the girl stormed wordlessly from the chamber. Days passed. With no consensus reached, the Ember Witches were left to bicker and Tessa was left to scheme. Until they had consensus on a course of action, they informed her with apologetic frowns. She would simply have to wait. And while she was loath to be kept waiting any longer than absolutely necessary, she did appreciate the opportunities the time presented. The Vesper Coven hadn't bored her quite yet. One by one, Tessa wrapped the embers about her fingers. 6 were easy. Her first 2 days in the valley had already primed them for the taking. She tucked another 3 into her pocket soon after, her natural charms attaching strings to them so subtle they didn't even notice. By the 1 week mark, there was only one witch in the valley who wouldn't readily throw themselves onto a pyre for her with no questions asked. Salma. Whenever she could, the young woman avoided Tessa, and as the days wore on, avoided her kin too. She kept to herself in impotent fury, trying and failing to appeal to the ember's reason. She often lingered about the shrine where Sunwing's reliquary was housed. She prayed and read from her people's holy texts, and seemed to appeal silently to the phoenix for aid. When she wasn't attending to the official duties of her station, she spent time in the gardens around the great hall and her home, tending to plots of peppers and grapes. Tessa watched her from afar, as a fox stalking a mouse, her eyes on the young woman even as she courted the others for their favor. And it was through this watching she learned a delightful secret. Salma was planning a murder. Oh, she was innocent enough on the surface, clever too. To any but the most discerning eye, she was simply a devoted Ember Witch. But there was a stash of supplies hidden in the soil of one of the garden plots, and one of the plants among the peppers was something else entirely, and there were hasty notes scribbled on the pages of her holy texts. Fragmented notes, mind you, but when Tessa stole a look through the pages late one evening, she understood the frustration directed towards the rest of her coven, and the young witch would often watch one of her elders in a way that the vixen recognized as predatory, her eyes glittering with hunger and resentment, her jaw tight. The discovery set her heart racing with joy, and her fox echoed her sentiment with wild thrashings of its tails. Hunt, it urged, its voice an exciting yip in her mind. Hunt now! This time she agreed. When Tessa approached Salma on her 8th day in the valley, it was to a stony glare and hostile silence. The witch's face was smudged with soil and sweat, a pile of weeds next to her. By contrast, Tessa was spotless, unaffected by the morning sun already blazing above. She flashed a beatific smile, all teeth. Please don't stop on my account. I hope your morning is well. Salma only stared at her, waiting. I was hoping we could have a little chat, you and I, be frank with each other. The ember rolled her eyes, digging into the soil to pull another weed. Tessa inspected the metal tips of her ornamental nail caps, testing their sharpness against her palm. I wanted to start by saying you're right. There was a pause at that, but the young woman returned to her work soon after. Little witch, I'm sorry, Salma, I am a sham. All at once, Salma's eyes widened and her gardening was forgotten. She whipped her head up to stare at Tessa, mouth hanging open, her face flushing with anger as the words processed. She gave the woman a moment, amused by the way her dough-brown eyes started darting around for possible exits. Yes, I know, it's quite a shock. I put on a convincing show, didn't I? You're the only one who could see through me, smart girl. 10 witches, and I've wound 9 of them up like little puppets. But not you. Do you know why I think you could call my bluff? Salma was only half listening, rushing to stand and shed her gardening gloves. Tessa paced, gesturing at the air as she drawled. Because of your faith, and because you're just as bad as I am. That stopped her. The young woman scoffed, snapping, Don't you dare! Now, now. No need for that. I mean it as a compliment, little spark. I like you. I really do. I understand. You're more a believer than any of the others, and you're ambitious besides. I'm a would-be thief, looking to bring Sunwing back to the world. Yes, that part was true. You're a would-be killer looking to bring Sunwing back to your home. Doesn't that sound like a nice pair to you? Tessa was a practiced liar who knew exactly how to hide her intentions. Salma, on the other hand, was not. The color drained from the young woman's face, and her fury mixed with fear. She sputtered to defend herself with panicked justifications. You're not from here. You couldn't possibly understand. All I do is for Sunwing, for the good of the Embers. I'm thinking of our future. The valley needs leadership with more faith, more devotion. It's all gone so stagnant, so complacent. There's no fire anymore. I could be the one to bring that fire back. The embers need change. But not you, went unspoken. Like the Lord of Wings rising from the ashes, we cannot grow unless our flames are reignited. But the vixen only nodded along as she let her ramble, waving her off and stepping into the garden to pat her on the shoulder. Yes, yes, very noble of you. Hush now, it's all right. I'm not here to condemn you, darling. I'm here because I see opportunity. I know a way for us both to get what we want. Me, the bone in the reliquary, and you, a higher position in the embers. That is why you want to kill him, right, Ambition? You think he's holding you back, holding the valley back, right? Good! Salma was trembling in speechless rage, and Tessa's hand tightened on her shoulder. She gave the young woman a little shake, gloating over the scent of fear and cooing. Aw, look at you. You're cute when you're overwhelmed. But come now. No need for that. We can be friends. I'd rather like if we were. I promise I can help you, little witch, if you help me too. It will be better for both of us, and for Sunwing too. This I swear to you. She leaned in close, her lips barely brushing the other woman's ear. So listen here. On the 9th day of Tessa's time in Vesser Coven, Salma gathered the other Ember Witches at Sunwing's shrine. The vixen stood proudly before the doors, her chin raised, as she regarded the 10 form a semicircle around her. There was much whispering, the midday sun sweltering overhead, and she breathed in the scent of warm soil and grass, and fear, still, from Salma. Her fox snickered. If ever there was a picture of defeat, it lay in the girl's slumped shoulders and lowered eyes. Behold, a witch of fire tamed. Lady Tessa, has something happened? The 4th Ember was a matronly woman whose face was creased with laugh lines. Right now she looked anxious, fiddling with her robes as she shifted from foot to foot. Tessa favored her with a warm smile that made the woman blush. Yes, actually, I'm pleased to say it has. On this 9th day, the Phoenix has blessed us. Finally. Consensus. She extended a hand towards Salma, who stepped forward from the semicircle among soft gasps of wonder. If any noticed the way the fight had gone from her, they made no comment. Would you do the honors, little spark? Salma was shaking again, but she nodded and ascended the stairs to take her place next to the vixen. She looked out over her 9 compatriots, who watched with wide, expectant eyes. Brothers and sisters, Her words hung there, on the rippling heat waves, the buzzing of cicadas filling the silence. The young witch took a deep breath. I must apologize. I realize now that I've been unreasonable. After a long talk with her, I now understand that Lady Tessa is... Every breath was held. The vixen waited, expectant and watching. Salma inhaled a deep breath, but when she opened her mouth to speak again, it was in a bellow that carried over the valley. "A false prophet!" she boomed, an inferno in her brown eyes and a wicked-looking athame in her hands before anyone could react. "Liar, deceiver, in Sunwing's name, before his eyes I smite thee down!" Tessa's eyes widened, and she screamed as the knife plunged into her chest, reeling backwards as pain ripped through her like a brand. Her fox wailed. In shock, she fell, dropping to the wood of the deck as Sama pulled the blade free and raised it bloody to the other embers, who were shouting in alarm and rushing to check on their beloved lady. "Brothers and sisters," the witch yelled, arms raised to the sky in triumph, "listen and heed. Yesterday, Lady Tessa revealed to me the truth of her deceit. She bade me aid her in stealing our most precious relic, the devouring sun, and tried to conscript me to her cause. In return for favors, she asked my favor, and I agreed that I might have the chance to bring you the truth. Just as I warned, our enemy is... It clothes itself in our colors," the seventh ember wailed. "It stalks and it waits," the second ember cried. "Patient and vicious as a deadly hunting beast," the ninth ember sobbed. Salma's smile widened with what she perceived as a victory, but it faded when she realized the truth of what she was beholding. The other ember witches were pointing not at Tessa, but at her. Their eyes were wild with panic, and "Our enemy is clever." All sound stopped. The birds and the insects, and all the gathered witches rendered silent. The air of the plaza grew stifling, unbearable heat searing their skin and drying their eyes. Tessa's crumpled form rose as if being pulled by strings. In a circle around her, the wood of the deck was seared black, glowing embers illuminating the planks. Her eyes were fire, and her voice boomed with a presence and power not her own. And where Salma had stabbed her, there was pristine skin and the unmistakable outline of fiery wings. Divinity was before the ember witches of the Vesper Coven, and they each dropped to prostrate themselves before it. All but Salma, who stood in petrified terror, with a still bloody athame. "Our enemy is clever, Tessa," or Sunwing continued, "but I am clever 100-fold. Behold the mark of the serpent. Behold a servant of Moonbane revealed." The thame flew from Salma's hand, and the vixen raised it high for all assembled to see. There, on the pommel, was the unmistakable shape of Moonbane, the serpent carved into the metal. Outraged gasps rippled through the crowd. The youngest ember witch shook her head and stumbled backward, panicked confusion on her color-drained face. "No, that's not my knife. How? I'm not... How are you doing that? You told me you were a fake." Her words were lost amidst the uproar that followed. The 9 remaining ember witches surged up the stairs, taking hold of a screaming Salma to drag her from the shrine. She was still screaming when they took her to the great hall where the central flames roared always. She would be screaming for a long time yet. And Tessa, alone at the shrine, finally let her glamours drop. She allowed herself a wicked chuckle, wincing slightly as she touched a stab wound on her chest. Lucky for her, the dull knife had not gone deep, and the little spark had terrible aim. As a herald, the wound would heal in no time. A very normal blade laid at her feet, no icons of Moonbane anywhere to be seen. Salma had fallen for her trap, just as she'd known she would. Idealism was such a simple thing to play with. Vesper Coven, the Ember Witches, and the reliquary of the devouring sun within the shrine were all hers. There was only one detail still puzzling her. For all her magic, all her thaumaturgy, all her glamours, Tessa hadn't any abilities that could have made the air so unbearably hot in the moment she'd sprung her trap. In fact, the whole performance had been rather more spectacular than she planned for it to be. So who or what had lent her the aid she needed? End of chapter 1.